Border controls are no longer predictable. Nations are quietly recalibrating how they treat visitors, and the United States now stands at the center of a tightening web. 6 recurring reasons for visa refusals expose how prior travel to sanctioned states has become a critical liability. The pattern is not random. It signals a strategic shift in mobility governance. Subscribe, drop a like, and tell me in the comments what you are seeing on the ground so you stay a step ahead. Global mobility is fragmenting under stress. Governments are reasserting borders as tools of leverage, framing movement not as a right but as a privilege subject to shifting risk assessments. The post-pandemic environment accelerated this recalibration, but geopolitical tensions gave it permanence. Trade disputes, security alliances, and regional conflicts are converting mobility into a weapon of statecraft. For travelers, the consequence is not theoretical. Denials, delays, and silent blacklisting are emerging as a new norm. The United States embodies this trend. With sanctions proliferating, Washington uses entry restrictions to reinforce foreign policy objectives. A visa applicant's history no longer stands on personal merit alone. It is examined through the prism of geopolitical exposure. Those who have visited sanctioned territories face a presumption of scrutiny. The message is clear. Where you have been may matter more than who you are. This shift destabilizes long-held assumptions about open travel. Visa-free regimes erode quietly and exemptions collapse without public notice. The once stable foundation of global mobility is under silent revision. The ripple effects extend beyond tourism. They shape business, academia, and migration corridors. Movement is no longer frictionless, and the obstacles are multiplying. For intelligence analysts, the signal is unmistakable. Borders are being retooled as selective filters. What was once routine is now a checkpoint of ideological alignment. Applicants unaware of this dynamic risk misreading the process as arbitrary. In reality, refusals are structured, patterned, and deliberate. The logic is stark. Travel history becomes metadata, and metadata becomes a tool of control. The United States and its partners are setting the precedent for how sanctioned-state exposure is weaponized against individuals seeking entry. Visa regimes are recalibrating beneath the surface. Silent collapses of exemptions occur when electronic travel authorizations are revoked overnight, or when consulates apply unpublished criteria. The applicant often receives only a brief rejection letter, but the underlying cause is exposure to high-risk destinations. 6 states in particular, those under current U.S. sanctions, are shaping refusal patterns for ordinary tourists. The operational mechanism is complex. Consular officers apply enhanced vetting protocols when prior travel to sanctioned states is detected in passports or disclosed in digital histories, even if the purpose was tourism, pilgrimage, or humanitarian work. The association triggers suspicion. Once flagged, applicants face either outright denial or prolonged administrative processing that amounts to de facto refusal. Electronic systems deepen the effect. ESTE, EVAs, and other pre-clearance mechanisms are integrating travel history databases into their risk engines. A single prior stamp or record of entry to a sanctioned country can disable eligibility instantly. These silent denials rarely allow appeal. They represent a structural redesign of mobility filters. Applicants often underestimate how small discrepancies compound risk. Incomplete disclosure of prior travel, mismatched dates, or inconsistent narratives during the interview can all convert a marginal case into an immediate refusal. Precision in documentation becomes critical. Yet even accuracy offers no guarantee against system-level exclusion. The outcome is a predictable tightening spiral. More countries adopt similar restrictions in alignment with U.S. policy. The global traveler's margin of error shrinks, and a map of accessible destinations contracts. Mobility, once assumed universal, now functions through selective corridors of trust. Surveillance at borders is escalating under the cover of efficiency. Artificial intelligence and biometric systems are centralizing vast data sets of traveler behavior. Every movement leaves a trace, and those traces form digital profiles that governments use to measure alignment or risk. The architecture is presented as neutral, but its operational logic reflects geopolitical priorities. At U.S. entry points, AI-driven risk engines fuse passport scans, visa histories, and open-source intelligence. The goal is not simply to verify identity, but to predict intent. Prior visits to sanctioned states weigh heavily in these calculations, regardless of purpose. The algorithms do not distinguish between leisure and politics. They register only exposure. Biometric capture reinforces this system. Fingerprints, facial recognition, and even behavioral metrics are linked with travel history databases. Once embedded, a profile can shadow a traveler for years. Attempts to apply for new visas or re-enter under different categories remain bound by the same flags. The system is designed for permanence, not forgiveness. The vulnerabilities of this architecture are significant. False positives, outdated records, and misclassified data expose ordinary travelers to risks of denial or detention. Yet redress mechanisms are minimal, appeals are slow, opaque, and rarely successful. The structure favors control over fairness. For analysts, the critical insight is that surveillance has moved from reactive to preemptive. Borders are now laboratories of predictive governance. Travel history is not just evidence, but a forecast. And sanctioned state exposure is treated as a marker of potential deviation. Traveler perception varies sharply by nationality. American citizens, once considered universally welcome, are experiencing reversals. In Europe, Asia, and parts of Africa, shifting attitudes toward U.S. foreign policy manifest in heightened checks and occasional denials. Americans are discovering that their passports no longer guarantee unquestioned entry. By contrast, applicants from neutral or strategically aligned nations sometimes encounter fewer barriers. This asymmetry reflects how states interpret alliances and rivalries. For example, citizens of smaller but geopolitically aligned nations may find smoother entry to the US than those from countries with ambiguous or adversarial ties. Mobility is now coded through geopolitics, not just identity. The case of sanctioned state exposure illustrates this dynamic. For U.S. consular officers, a European traveler with past visits to Iran or Syria may receive careful scrutiny, but an American with the same history faces compounded suspicion. Nationality no longer shields against risk when travel history collides with policy. This divergence is reshaping mobility psychology. Travelers increasingly self-censor itineraries, avoiding entire regions for fear of downstream consequences. The act of choosing destinations now carries strategic weight, influencing future visa outcomes. Tourism becomes entangled with geopolitics in ways few anticipated a decade ago. The intelligence takeaway is clear. Nationality remains a powerful variable, but it no longer guarantees privilege. Exposure, alignment, and history converge into a triage that redefines risk categories for global movement. The risks for travelers are not abstract. Denials, deportations, and detentions are immediate consequences of sanctioned state exposure. Consular officers rarely provide detail, leaving applicants without clarity. A single prior entry can derail future travel plans indefinitely. At airports, the dangers intensify. Secondary screenings can escalate into prolonged interrogations. Digital devices may be searched, and narratives tested against recorded histories. A minor inconsistency can be treated as deception, triggering deportation or multi-year bans. The line between error and violation is dangerously thin. Travelers miscalculate the stakes when they assume past trips are forgotten. In reality, electronic records ensure permanence. Even if old passports are replaced, database integration resurrects prior travel patterns. What seemed insignificant years ago becomes decisive in the present. Humanitarian contexts do not always offer protection. Journalists, aid workers, and researchers with sanctioned state travel on record face the same scrutiny as casual tourists. The systems are designed to detect presence, not purpose. This structural indifference makes error margins lethal. The cumulative effect is deterrence. Risk-averse travelers are already adjusting behavior, avoiding sanctioned destinations entirely, but those unaware of the risk stumble into consequences with little recourse. The intelligence warning is unambiguous. Small missteps now carry disproportionate costs. Looking forward, mobility governance will tighten further. In the short term, the U.S. is expected to expand automated screening systems, integrating more cross-border databases. This will reduce the margin for oversight and increase the number of silent refusals. For travelers, the era of discretionary leniency is ending. In the medium term, reciprocal measures are likely. States targeted by U.S. sanctions may impose counter-restrictions, creating fragmented corridors of exclusion. Travelers from allied states may find pathways narrowing unexpectedly as alignments shift. The map of accessible destinations will continue to shrink in unpredictable patterns. Technological acceleration compounds this trajectory. Biometric ecosystems, blockchain verification, and predictive AI will harden entry regimes. The logic is efficiency, but the outcome is restriction. Once integrated, these systems are resistant to rollback, embedding surveillance into mobility permanently. Policy debates within the U.S. suggest further tightening. Proposals to expand travel bans and lengthen administrative processing reflect bipartisan security consensus. Even if political rhetoric shifts, operational mechanisms tend to persist across administrations. The architecture of control outlives electoral cycles. For strategic travelers and organizations, preparation is essential. Understanding refusal patterns, anticipating sanctions exposure, and adjusting itineraries are no longer optional. They are the baseline requirements for survival in a contracting mobility landscape. Global mobility is no longer neutral. The United States uses visa denials linked to sanctioned-state exposure as a lever of foreign policy, embedding geopolitics into personal travel. The risks are real, structured, and expanding. Strategic awareness is the only defense against a system designed to filter not just who enters, but who aligns. Stay informed. Stay ahead. Subscribe now and join the conversation below.